Welcome to Lead Well, Live Whole. I'm your host, Michael Sirmon. Every episode, we'll spend a few minutes exploring the challenges, questions, and realities of everyday life, because success means little if you lose yourself in the process. So take a breath, settle in, and let's spend a few minutes exploring life together. So Tammy and I spend a lot of time just traveling around the country, and we typically drive when we go. And one of the things that we like to do is stop at cemeteries. Why? I don't know. There's just something peaceful about them, something interesting about the lives that are there, and you can see and read some interesting things sometimes. But I've been thinking recently about what we have seen, and I'm sure we've all seen hundreds of times, but I don't think that we spend too much time thinking about it. And that's the headstones, right? On the headstone, if you think, there's usually a name, maybe a few words about the person, and then there are two dates: the year they were born and the year they died. Between those two dates, there's a tiny little dash. And it occurred to me that the dates really don't tell us very much about the person at all. In fact, everything that we would want to know about them happened in that little space between the dates. The dash represents an entire life. Think about that. It holds the people they loved, the places they went, the mistakes they made, the things they got right, and probably quite a few things they got wrong. It holds all the weddings and all the funerals, the children and the grandchildren, careers, vacations, arguments, reconciliations, everything. But it also holds a lot of Monday mornings, a lot of trips to the grocery store, thousands of times mowing the yard, driving to work, making dinner, and sitting on the couch at the end of a long day wondering where the time went. And I think that's the part I've been thinking about the most, because most of our dash doesn't feel very important while we're living it. Welcome to Lead Well, Live Whole. I'm Michael Sirmon, and today I want to spend a little time talking about the ordinary days of our lives, because I think sometimes we can become so focused on getting to someday that we forget this is where life is actually happening. Most of us have some version of someday in our heads. Someday when things aren't busy, we'll slow down. Someday when we're making a little more money, we'll take that trip. Someday when the kids are older, we'll have more time for each other. And then the kids actually get older, and we start telling ourselves that someday, when they're finally out of the house, then we'll do those things we've been putting off. We think about retirement. We think about paying off the house. We think about finishing this project or getting through this difficult season. And there's nothing wrong with any of that. Matter of fact, I believe in planning. I believe in goals. And anybody who knows me and Tammy know that we usually have something we're working toward. There's something healthy about looking ahead and asking what we want to build, what we want to do, who we want to become. The problem comes when we become so focused on someday that we begin treating today like it's just something we have to get through, right? Because someday isn't where your life happens. Your life's happening while you're trying to get to someday, right? Think about that. Someday isn't where your life happens. Your life is happening while you're trying to get to someday. I mean, think about an average day. What's it look like for most of us? We get up, we make the coffee. Well, right now I'm making tea because Tammy won't let me have any coffee. We get ready and we go to work. We answer emails, we solve problems, we sit through meetings, we run errands, we figure out what's for dinner, and maybe do a few things around the house, and eventually we sit down for a little while before going to bed, and then tomorrow we do some version of that again. And there isn't usually background music playing, nobody's standing there taking pictures, we don't get any high fives for any of it, right? And we don't go to bed thinking, wow, this is one of the greatest days of my life, because it's just Wednesday. But here's what I've begun to understand. Those ordinary Wednesdays aren't happening between the important parts of our lives. They are the important parts of our lives. We tend to remember life by its milestones, right? We remember the wedding. We remember when the children were born. We remember graduations, promotions, vacations, and major accomplishments. Those are the things that end up in photo albums and become the stories we tell people later. But when you really think about it, those big moments, they make up a remarkably small percentage of our time. Most of our lives happens on days when nothing particularly noteworthy takes place. See, I envy Tammy in some ways because she has a memory that remembers those ordinary days, right? She can remember her first steps, right? She can give you the details about it, and it shocks people when she tells them. She can remember conversations that happened when she was, just a little kid, and things that family members said or did, and then now, 40 years later, almost 50 years later, when she brings them up, they're shocked that she can remember those. And, I know that with me, and I'm sure with most people, we sometimes sit back and we look at our days and we wonder, where has all that time gone? Where has my energy went, right? Just like a lot of times you look in your bank account and you say, where did my money go, right? But I wonder, if we're honest, if some of those things that feel incredibly ordinary to us today will eventually become the things we would give almost anything to experience one more time. I mean, I remember when the kids were little and we're playing baseball. Right, I was working and involved with church, involved with politics and different things. I was always running somewhere, and the lion's share of hauling them to and fro and doing all that fell on Tammy, and she was a trooper for doing it. And at the time, I remember we were so happy for ball season to be over because then we could rest. But then as soon the next day, it's like we were suddenly missing all of that again. And here I am, I'm 60 years old, and I look back to that time, and I miss those days. I miss being with the boys out playing ball. I miss coaching teams. I just miss that activity, going to their events at school and all of that. They were ordinary things that we did. But today I look back and they're incredibly fond memories. And if you've raised children, right, you know what I'm talking about. Just think about it. There were probably seasons when the house was constantly noisy. Somebody always needed something. Somebody always needed to be taken somewhere, and in our household especially, there were shoes in places where shoes weren't supposed to be. Dishes were everywhere, and schedules that seemed impossible to keep up with were always present. Now, don't get me wrong. When I say dishes everywhere, Tammy was neurotic about the house being clean. And she did an incredible job and wore herself to the bone trying to do it. And I apologize to you, Tammy, because the boys and I did not do a good job of supporting you during that season. It seemed like our primary focus was generating more for you to do, and that was 100% wrong, and I know that now. But in those days, I know that there were a lot of times when we would think, I just want 5 minutes of peace and quiet. But there came a day when we got it, right? The house became quieter. Nobody needed a ride anymore. Nobody was yelling your name from the other room. The thing you wanted so badly eventually arrived. And maybe somewhere along the way, you realized that some of that noise you were trying to escape was actually the sound of your life happening. Right? And I think relationships can be that way too, right? Maybe you remember sitting around a dinner table with people who aren't at that table anymore. At the time, nobody stopped and announced that this was an important moment. We were just having dinner. Somebody was probably complaining about something. Somebody was late. Somebody had their elbows on the table. It was just another meal. And nobody said, hey, this may be the last time I sit at this table. But now, oh, how much we'd love to sit at that table again. How much we'd love to have the conversations with our moms and dads and our grandparents and aunts and uncles and the friends that are no longer in our lives. How we'd love to sit at that table and have a conversation with my 5 and 9-year-old sons, right? The different conversations I would have today. And I think that's what makes the ordinary parts of our lives so easy to miss, because they rarely announce themselves as important, right? Sometimes we don't recognize their value until they're gone. And I'm not meaning to make this depressing. Actually, I'm really not. I think it should do exactly the opposite. I think it should wake us up to what we still have, right? Because you and I, we're still in the dash. We still have today. And maybe one of the questions we need to ask every once in a while isn't, what am I going to accomplish next? Maybe it's simply, am I actually present for the life I'm living now? Right? Because being present is not as easy as it sounds. Right? I've caught myself sitting with people I care about while part of my mind is somewhere else. Right? I'm thinking about something I need to do tomorrow. I'm thinking about work. I'm thinking about the next podcast or the next project. Or, and I'm bad about this, maybe I'm looking at my phone when there's a real person sitting 3 feet away from me. And I don't think I'm unusual in that. Right? We live in a world that constantly asks for our attention. And if we're not careful, we can spend our lives physically present and mentally somewhere else. We can be sitting at dinner while thinking about work. We can be on vacation while answering emails. We can be having a conversation while wondering what notification just popped up on the phone. Sometimes we're so busy documenting our lives that we aren't actually experiencing them. There's times when we were traveling that, Tammy used to have a photography business, so she's a great photographer. And with her phone, she's always taking pictures of stuff. And then she's going through what she'd just taken a picture and sorting and all that. I'm like, Tammy, stop looking at that and look at what you're missing while you're doing that. Right? And then we have those moments when we see that something is just spectacular and we don't have our phones with us, or we don't have a camera. And, and I remember telling Tammy one time, I told her, I said, sometimes those magical moments we see are for us to store in our minds and our hearts. They're not for us to take a picture of. Right? Because this almost sounds like I'm anti-technology, and I am 100% not anti-technology, right? I'm not arguing against ambition. I'm not arguing against technology, or I'm not arguing against planning for tomorrow. And I'm certainly not going to tell you to stop setting goals, because I'm not going to stop setting mine. What I'm simply suggesting is that someday shouldn't be allowed to steal our today. We have this tendency to believe that once we reach a certain point, then we'll finally enjoy everything. Once we get the promotion, once we get the house, once we have enough money, once we retire. But have you noticed what happens when we finally get some of those things? The promotion that we're so excited about suddenly becomes a normal job. The dream house becomes the house where the dishwasher needs to be emptied and something needs to be repaired. The new car eventually needs new tires. The vacation becomes a collection of pictures on your phone, and even retirement eventually becomes an ordinary Tuesday morning. And pretty soon, we invent another someday. Maybe living whole isn't about finally constructing a life where every day feels extraordinary. Maybe it's about learning to recognize the value of an ordinary life while we're still living it. There's something important in having coffee with your spouse in the morning, or tea in my case. There's something important about calling your parents while you still can. There's something important about sitting in the stands at your grandchild's game, or having lunch with a friend you've known for 20 years. There's something important about walking outside in the evening and actually noticing that the sun is going down, right? None of those things are going to make it on your resume. You're not going to win any awards for them. The reality is that those things, they will be in your dash, right? In fact, I suspect they're going to end up being some of the most important parts of it, right? Which brings me to something that may be a little more challenging. I think most of us have something we've attached the word someday to. Maybe there's someone you've been meaning to call. Maybe there's a relationship that needs some attention, someone you need to forgive. Maybe there's something you've needed to say for a long time. It could be an I love you. It could be I'm sorry. It could be I forgive you. Maybe there's something you've wanted to try, but you've convinced yourself that you'll have more time later. You tell yourself someday I'll do it. Someday I'll make time. Someday I'll have the conversation. Someday I'll go see them. Someday I'll change. But the uncomfortable truth is that none of us knows exactly how much dash we have left. And I don't mean that in a morbid way. I mean it in a clarifying way. Knowing that our time is limited doesn't make today less meaningful. It makes today more meaningful. So here's a question that I've been asking myself, and maybe it's worth you asking yourself too. If the way I'm living right now became the pattern for the next 10 years, would I be grateful for the life it created, right? And that's a totally different question than asking what I hope my life looks like 10 years from now. We can all imagine a future for ourselves, where we finally have gotten everything together. What I'm talking about is the life we're actually living, the seeds we're planting for that 10 years, right? Where does our attention go? Who gets our time? What relationships are we nurturing? Who or what are we constantly postponing? What are we allowing to consume energy that when we look back 10 years from now, probably really wouldn't have mattered that much? Because I don't think our lives are built primarily in the handful of big decisions we make. They're built through ordinary days repeated thousands of times. And I know that there are difficult seasons. There are times when you're not trying to savor every moment. You're just trying to get through the day. There are seasons of grief, uncertainty, financial pressure, health problems, difficult jobs, and relationships that really aren't what we wish they were. Living in the dash doesn't mean pretending that everything's wonderful. It means recognizing that even the hard seasons are part of our lives, right? We don't get to put those years on pause and come back to them later when we feel stronger. Maybe living whole simply means refusing to sleepwalk through the days we've been given. It means being present enough to notice the people around us, grateful enough to appreciate something ordinary, humble enough to apologize when we need to, courageous enough to have the conversation we've been avoiding, wise enough to recognize that this ordinary Wednesday isn't disposable. Because someday, someone may look at your name on a headstone. They'll see the year you were born and the year you died, and between them will be a little dash. They won't see the emails that you thought couldn't wait. They won't know how many deadlines you met. They probably won't know whether your house was the nicest one on the street or whether you got the promotion you thought you needed, which are most of the things that consume our attention today. But you know what? They won't fit on that stone. They'll just be one little dash. But you know what's inside of it? You're living inside it right now. So maybe today doesn't need to be extraordinary. Maybe we just need to be awake for it. My challenge is for you to make the call you've been meaning to make. Sit just a little longer with someone you love. Put the phone down when someone is talking to you. Tell your spouse what they mean to you. Watch the sunset without worrying about getting a picture of it. Laugh when someone is funny. Forgive somebody. Ask for forgiveness if you need it. Hug someone just a little bit longer, but not in a creepy way. Don't become so busy building a life that you hope to enjoy someday that you miss the life sitting right in front of you. Because someday is not where your life happens. Your life is happening while you're trying to get to someday. And maybe that's what I want both you and I to remember this week. These aren't the days we're supposed to hurry through so we can finally get to our lives. These are the days. Some will be wonderful. Some will be difficult. Most will probably feel pretty ordinary, but they're all going into the dash. So let's be there for them. And until next time, lead well, live whole. If today's conversation raised a question you've been wrestling with, I'd love to help. I offer one-on-one coaching for individuals navigating pressure, transition, and important decisions. You can learn more at michaelsirmon.com.